Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm Robert Winfrey, I'm your host for this show, and here's your fair warning, this is a solo show from me. Nobody else. Jeff had a previous engagement come up, and, Pat's still on his hiatus, you're stuck with me. I apologize in advance. Should be a relatively quick show tonight, all things considered. We're going to start out with a review of UFC Fight Night 137, which, oh boy, did that event kind of suck. I mean, there were some highlights, there were some lowlights, but, oh god, it was a 14-fight card. It never ended. I'm convinced I'm actually still watching this now, and my brain is simply shut off as some kind of defense mechanism against the unending amount of just mediocre MMA with over-the-hill Brazilian legends and other. Oh god, just that like there must be some level of hell reserved for that. Just hey, guess what? It's an FS1 Fight Night card that never ends. Ugh. There were also a couple of big news items that came out over the last week. Jon Jones got his sentence handed down and has a potential return date. UFC 132 got a relevant co-main event, so I'll go over the stuff that I have notes for from that. I grabbed a few notes when Jeff told me he wasn't going to be able to make it. So, with that out of the way, let's get into this card. Let's just get this out of the way. Actually, last week when Jeff and I were recording the show, and I wish I could say live, because we don't broadcast live, but we record live. We record, and then I immediately I don't edit this at all. It's recorded, it's put out. I mean, for whatever value live to tape has, type of thing. Anyway, as we were kind of wrapping up that show, it came out that Jimmy Manuwa had fallen out of the main event, and Eric Anders was stepping in. So this main event looked nothing like the original intention. The original intention for this fight was Glover Teixeira and Jimmy Manuwa. Then Glover fell out, and Thiago Santos decided, sure, I'll move up to light heavyweight on a more permanent basis, and I'll fight Jimmy Manuwa. It's a good first fight for me in the division. Then, 6 days away, Jimmy Manuwa falls out, and Eric Anders, who's a career middleweight, and will be going back to middleweight in all likelihood, steps in to fight Thiago Santos. Nothing like the original look. I gotta give Anders credit. I mean, anyone who takes a fight on 6 days' notice, that's not an easy thing to do at all. Unfortunately, it showed in his performance in a lot of ways. This fight was... People have called it a war, and I don't like using that in... I don't know. To me, a fight that's a war has a positive connotation to it. There's a level of real excitement and enjoyment that goes into watching it, and I didn't feel that for this fight. It was a very grueling battle, and I don't mean that in a it was grueling to watch. I mean these two. This was a brutal fight. They put it on each other. Anders he looked like a guy who stepped in on short notice. He kept trying to force takedowns. He wasn't really comfortable at distance. That's always been kind of a weakness of his game anyway, but against Thiago Santos, that's really not where you want to be. Neither guy was in really great shape for 5 rounds. The fight ended after the third, but they were both huffing and puffing pretty hard after, 2. So going into the third, they were both pretty gassed. It was, and short notice fights happen to, that's a byproduct. Sometimes you're just not ready, especially for 5 rounds. You might be able to muck your way through a 3-round fight, but 5 is... There's a special kind of conditioning and preparation that goes into 5-round fights for a reason. Anyway, the official winner, Thiago Santos, defeated Eric Anders via TKO between rounds 3 and 4. So it's officially a referee stoppage. This was pretty hard to watch, actually. Towards the end, Eric Anders actually had a pretty good third round. I gave the round to him. But at the end, he's got Santos on the cage and he's bent over, kind of looking for a single or a double, in that position. And Santos is throwing the Travis Brown-style elbows to the head. He sneaks some looping, real looping punches around the arms of Anders to kind of get, and just for a good, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, he's landing these shots. And Anders is kind of moving. He drops to his knees at one point, and under different circumstances that might have prompted the stoppage, but because he also could have just as easily been trying to change the angle on his takedown attempt, it wasn't. Round ends in that spot. Eric Anders can't get to his feet. His corner kind of helps him up. He immediately collapses again. The referee sees this and is nope. Instantly waves this off. Really good stoppage by the referee in this instance. Mark Goddard, who's, again, no referee is without flaw, mind you, but he's one of the more solid refs. I don't know what you do with Thiago Santos at light heavyweight. It's a weird division. It's kind of a dumpster fire, I've said in the past, and until it stops being so, we'll continue to refer to it as such. You've got guys hanging around that you could conceivably book him against. I just got to look at the UFC's pound-for-pound ranking because I wanted to pull up their official ones, and boy, they're stupid. Anyway, you could do him and Krylov. Let me see. Pedro's hanging around. Reyes has a fight coming up. You don't want to go too far with him, but again, someone like Krylov, Pat Cummins. If Shogun still wants to fight, kill Shogun. You would just murder him. God, that's... if you wanted to go with someone more towards the top of the division, they tried to make him and Manuel. You could just try to rebook that fight. You got the loser of it. Isn't Shogun fighting, Volkan Oezdemir coming up, or was that Oezdemir and Anthony Smith? I think it was Oezdemir and Anthony Smith. But you could he slots in relatively nicely because the division is in desperate need of, people that aren't, terrible. Yeah, you have Serkinov and Pat Cummins fighting at that Fight Night 138. You could easily slot him in there with the winner of that fight. Boy, that is not a good fight card. I'm just glancing over Fight Night 138. The main event is Volkan Oezdemir and Anthony Smith. Artem Lobov's on it, so you know it's going to suck. Serkinov and Cummins. Gavin Tucker's back after his corner and a terrible referee wanted to see him murdered. John Vellante. God, this is not a good card. That is really not a good card. So anyway, he can slot into somewhere in the top 15 without too much difficulty. He's a good fighter. I need to see him against a real light heavyweight before really assessing him, because Eric Anders is not a light heavyweight. But that said, Eric Anders didn't look outsized in this fight. He's a middleweight by design. So I don't think this will be held too much against Anders, but this is his first loss by stoppage. And there's that can change people. I will say he seemed to be in pretty good spirits. He had the best joke after this fight. Cuz again, he and Santos were both dead tired. But I think he said on Twitter after, I haven't been that tired since my wedding night. And Anders he's not the most presented athlete, but he's got some personality to him, and he's he's still a potential player at middleweight. And I'm curious to see. There's still issues he has to develop, but I don't think this will set him back too much. Again, it was a short notice thing, up a division. This probably won't impact him too much negatively, but not a bad fight to close the card with. Again, just relatively, a decent enough level of skill between the two of them. Plenty of leather went back and forth. Plenty of brutality. I'm down. Your co-main event thankfully didn't last long. Alex Oliveira, the Brazilian cowboy, Defeated Carlo Pedersoli via TKO 39 seconds of the first round. This was not close. Oliveira caught a side kick, which just means Pedersoli was doing it wrong. Those are really hard to catch. But he caught it, and he kind of pushed it to the inside of his body, stepped forward, and just blasted Pedersoli with a right as he was kind of leaning over, and that dropped him. And Oliveira just got on top and smashed him into, a fine powder on the mat. Pedersoli was horribly out of his depth here. I mean, he was supposed to fight, Neil Magny? Yeah, he was supposed to fight Magny. But that got swapped because Magny's in the main event for a later card when he fights Santiago Ponzinibbio. Pedersoli was here to do the job. He was there to get squashed. He got squashed. I don't have a whole lot to say here. I like Alex Oliveira, but I think we've seen his ceiling. And, guys like Ponzinibbio, Masvidal, Magny, I'm not saying he can't beat them, but it's hard. Those are really hard for him. But he keeps winning. He keeps moving up. I mean, he's already lost to Donald Cerrone and probably would again. But you could do the rematch there. You could fight the winner or loser of Magny versus Ponzinibbio. I mean, he's still a very, very talented fighter, but I get the sense we've kind of seen his ceiling, all things considered. Let's see. Oh, God, this fight was terrible. Little Nog, Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, defeated Sam Alvey via TKO in the second round. This was sad. This was just a sad, sad thing. I mean, look, if you have an emotional attachment to Little Nog, and I kind of do, from all those years when he was one of the best light heavyweights in the world, he just was always kind of overshadowed by a few guys who were a step ahead of him. Be that Vanderlei or Shogun or just circumstance kind of conspiring against him in pride, what have you. Then seeing him at 42 years old get a knockout is kind of cool. This was a dreadful fight. There were a couple of really, really bad fights on this card. And this was one of them. This was just not a good fight. Don't let the finish fool you. This was really not a good fight. This is not a UFC caliber fight by the general standards of the term. Little Nog needs to retire. Sam Alvey needs to go away. I mean, I appreciate Sam Alvey's personality, and he's got a great promo, especially for MMA, but I hate watching his fights. And that's kind of the meat of, what drives you to watch MMA is the actual fights. Dreadful fight. In another very sad performance, Andre Ewell defeated Renan Barão via split decision. There was 129-28 for Barão, 229-28 for Ewell. I was 29-28 Ewell. I can sort of see the argument for Barão taking rounds 1 and 2. I mean, he took round 1 comprehensively. That wasn't close. Round 2, I think most of the argument for him taking round 2 is the fact that he got a takedown and then got held in half guard for 40 seconds or so. And to me, that didn't negate all of the fact that he just got jabbed and, he got boxed up for the rest of that round. And then the third round was all Ewell. Hard to think of too many fighters who have had as sudden and precipitous a fall as Renan Barão. Him and Johnny Hendricks are like the two that come to mind. Miguel Torres, actually. For those of you who were around the fight, were fans of hardcore fans of MMA when Miguel Torres was running things. He dropped off a cliff. Brian Bowles knocked him out, and that was it. He never recovered. There's some arguments about his fight with Demetrius Johnson being scored improperly. I don't agree with them. I think I scored that for Mighty Mouse. But, Miguel Torres was on top of the world, had a massive winning streak. It was similar to Barão in it was 20 fights, 20 plus fights, years and years. He was the best bantamweight in the world. And then something, and he loses to Bowles and just never gets back on the horse. Maybe it was his chin, maybe it was the years just catching up to him, years of weight cutting, which is a big thing. I think that's the primary contributing factor for both Barao and Johnny Hendricks is the years of weight cutting. I mean, we can joke about USADA, and I don't necessarily think that's an unfounded claim, but I genuinely believe that more importantly to their drop-off is that these are guys who have spent years, if not, a decade plus of their life cutting weight. I mean, in the case of Johnny Hendricks, he wrestled in high school, and you cut weight at high school wrestling, so he's been cutting weight since he was 16. And Hendricks, of course, also famously got really heavy between camps, which just exacerbates the amount of weight he's losing. It increases the toll on the body. And I think that contributed probably about as again more than a theoretical cleanup associated with USADA. I don't know, but I think again those guys who have hard cuts and who make them consistently for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. When that drop-off comes, man, it can come in a hurry because you have done some serious damage to your body. It doesn't help in the case of Barao that he got, violently stopped a few times in a row. I mean, Barao missed weight for this fight, too. For a bantamweight fight at 135 pounds, he weighed in at 141.6. Not 146. God, that would have been bad. But, I mean, he missed weight by like 6 pounds. It's not a good thing. That's a terrible, terrible weight cut. And then he gassed anyway. I mean, if you miss by like 1.5 pounds and you gas out, that's kind of to be expected. You miss by 6 pounds. I mean, at least you'd think a benefit from that is I'm not going to gas myself out related to the weight cut if I just miss by this much. But nope, he gassed. Barao's done. I mean, he needs to go away. He just lost to a guy making his UFC debut who looked relatively pedestrian outside of hand speed and the ability to throw a straight punch. And kicking off the main card, we had a majority draw between Randa Marcos and Marina Rodriguez. I agreed with the draw. There were two 28-28, which was my score. There was one 29-28, I believe, for Marcos. Was it from... I want to say it was for Marcos, but I'm not completely sure about that. It might have been for Rodriguez. I may have misheard the thing at the time. But, yeah, Marcos got a 10-8 in the first. She was able to get a takedown off of that god-awful head and arm throw. Got on top, had mount for like 2 minutes. I mean, just mauled this poor girl, mauled this woman on the ground. Just smashed her to pieces. But didn't finish her. They came out, and in the second round, Marcos couldn't really get a takedown. I think she did a couple minor ones, but she never established position. And Rodriguez kind of beat her up. I mean, Marcos kind of took the second round off, which led us to the third round where it was a little bit more the same. Again, Marcos kept looking for that head and arm throw, and if you get it once, you should just be grateful, but you're not going to get it again on anyone who knows anything. And so, again, for me, it was Marcos had a 10-8 first, Rodriguez took the second 2, and ta-da, draw. Which was the official ruling, and again, one I agreed with. I mean, I'm not opposed to more draws in MMA. I think there's plenty of times it's a more appropriate scorecard than some of the decisions we get, especially some split decisions. It's like, ugh. Give the guy the 10-8 he deserves, and we'll see what happens. In this case, Marcos earned a 10-8 in the first round. She couldn't do much after that, but she didn't lose. Not a great fight, but I mean, mid-level women's MMA. I mean, it's never going to be. It's not that good right now. I shouldn't say it's never going to be good, but women's MMA is still developing in a lot of respects, and there's some fighters that are kind of one-dimensional but get by, and in the next 3 to 4 years they're going to be phased out in favor of fighters who are better everywhere, and the general level of competition will rise. And I hope it happens sooner. Alright, as for the prelims, because it's just me, I can just go through all of these. Charles Oliveira defeated Christos Giagos via rear naked choke in the second round. Kind of a touch-and-go first round for Oliveira. Didn't look all that great. Giagos had some really good straight punches that were troubling him. Oliveira uses a really high guard when he thinks you're punching at him. His body is wide, wide open for attack. Anthony Pettis crumpled him a couple of times with body kicks when they fought, and that's part of the reason his guard comes way up and his body's wide open. Pity Yagos didn't actually pick up on that, but just in the second round, Oliveira got a takedown. Yagos tried to wall walk. Oliveira got his back, choked him out like it was very quickly. This was a bit of history for Oliveira. This was his 11th submission win in the UFC, which means he now has the most submission wins in UFC history. Prior to this, he was tied at 10 with Royce Gracie, which I'm not sure should count because Gracie earned at least half of those against people who had no idea what an armbar was. Whereas Oliveira's choking out or tapping out guys who actually have a decent level of skill. But he now has the most. Good for him. He mentioned after the fight he wants to go back down to featherweight, and just no. Bad Oliveira. No featherweight. He tried featherweight several times. He's tried featherweight. He missed weight 3 times. 4. Missed weight 4 times when fighting at featherweight. Missed for the Swanson fight. Missed for the Stevens fight. Missed for the Jury fight. Weighed up a full weight class for the Lamas fight. He weighed 155 when he fought Ricardo Lamas, and that was for a featherweight fight. Just no. Look, you're not going back to featherweight. Get over it. Move on with your life. Francisco Trinaldo had a nasty submission, had a nasty knockout. It's a knee to the body to defeat Evan Dunham in the second round. Dunham was just kind of leaning, throwing. I think it was like a long left. Might have been the back half of a 1-2, but he was leaning way over, and Trinaldo timed this rear knee right to his ribs. He was fully extended. His right arm was fully out. Since his southpaw, it would have been a bit of a jab, or at least one retracting. Dunham dropped like he got shot. I didn't even see what had happened necessarily when I was watching that live. But Dunham dropped like he'd been shot in this, just down immediately. Got hit, dropped like a rock. Immediate stoppage by the ref. Rolled. It took him a while to get back up. This was a brutal knee to the liver. Quite frankly, Trinaldo got screwed out of a performance bonus. In all honesty, that was such a better win than Nogueira's over Alvey. Trinaldo got screwed. Brutal win. This was Dunham's last fight. Probably overdue. Dunham, 5-10 years ago was a young up-and-coming guy, then spent the next 5 to 6 years being the young up-and-coming guy, and now is gone. Trinaldo's an older guy. I don't know that he's got another real run left in him. He called out Kevin Lee, and Lee's already beaten him soundly. But if Lee's down for the rematch, again, if both guys are amenable, I don't care. That's on them. I'd be down to watch it, but I really still favor Lee in that fight. Let's see. God, this fight sucked. Ryan Spann defeated Luis Enrique via unanimous decision, 230-27s, 129-28. Both guys gassed relatively quickly. Spann sucks off of his back, but Enrique couldn't do much after the first round. Spann has a good jab. He bloodied Enrique's nose pretty convincingly with it. He's got good straight punches, but his gas tank wasn't there. He gassed hard. Like, poor Jimmy Smith trying to interview this guy, and he's just sucking wind, barely able to get thoughts out. Again, not great, but it's light heavyweight, and he's a young enough guy that he might be able to turn things around. It's not a good fight. Also not a good fight. Augusto Sakai defeated Chase Sherman via TKO in the third round. This fight sucked. It was crappy heavyweights. Don't be dissuaded by the finish. It was a lot of bad punching, clinching. Just not a good fight. On Fight Pass, Sergio Moraes became the first man to submit Ben Saunders in MMA when he tapped him out with an arm triangle choke in the second round. Look, Saunders has a good guard in the sense that he's got a good rubber guard. Maybe a little bit of mission control, the double rubber. But not a lot outside of that. His guard game seems predicated on his opponent being just significantly worse than him on the ground. I mean, Patrick Cote had a lot of success against him on the ground. He was just able to take him down and then neutralize the rubber guard and beat him up from there. Peter Sabata did basically that same thing to him. Rubber guard's an important position, and I think it's one that is largely underutilized in MMA, but he was fighting Sergio Moraes. And for those of you unaware, Moraes isn't just a really good MMA fighter. I mean, his UFC record is like 8, 10, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's like 9-2 in the UFC. 9-2-1 in the UFC. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, okay. He's 8-2-1 in the UFC. He's a really good fighter. In addition to that, he is a multiple-time world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's a two-time world champion. He placed for 4 consecutive years. He podiumed at the World Championships in 08, 09, 10, and 11. I mean, this is not a guy who's going to be dissuaded by someone who knows something about rubber guard. This was a jiu-jitsu clinic from Moraes. Maria Bueno Silva defeated Jillian Robertson via armbar in the first round. I don't know what happened to Silva's knee, but man, she did something to it either in this fight or immediately after, because she could not walk on it. I mean, she's really fortunate she got that finished, because if she has to try and walk back to her corner between rounds 1 and 2, and then, she couldn't walk out of the cage. Literally could not walk out of the cage. Had to be helped. Could not put any weight on her something with her left leg. I don't know if it was knee, ankle, what, but something just gave out on her completely in her left or right. I can't remember which leg it was, but one of them. And if you can't walk, you can't fight. That's just a given. Robertson was doing okay in this fight, but got caught in an armbar, didn't allow for the fence position, and normally stuffing someone up against the fence it's a mixed bag, because it's harder to get certain submissions off, especially if their head is really kind of jacked up and you've broken their posture on the bottom. It does let them wall walk, but it makes certain submissions harder. There's other submissions that become easier. And in this instance, because of the positioning of the cage, when Silva rolled for this armbar, Robertson couldn't follow the hips. The hips wound up up against the cage. And that can make finishing a bit trickier, but it's much easier to finish that because they can't step around. They can't. Again, the best way to not get armbarred is to keep your hips perfectly aligned with their hips. They need to be perpendicular to really finish that off. So if you keep your hips squared up with them, can't be armbarred. Well, they can't finish the armbar. I mean, they can get the process going, and because of the fence position, Robertson couldn't follow, got her arm taken off. Not much there. Talis Latis defeated Hector Lombard via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. This was the final fight of Latis' career. He announced his retirement. Fight kind of sucked. I mean, Lombard really chewed up the inside of Latis' lead leg with leg kicks in the first round and then kind of got away with them. Or stopped going to them. I mean, Latis' knee was swollen. He looked like he had another kneecap. Like there was just this big swelling on the inside of his knee. But Lombard got away from those, gassed out. Latis got a crappy decision. I mean, it was a crappy fight. Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos got a big win over Luigi Vendramini via knockout, flying knee and punches in the second round. Dos Santos was supposed to fight Bilal Muhammad. Muhammad fell out. Vendramini stepped in on relatively short notice. I mean, yeah. Oh, geez, yeah. Short notice. I miscounted the months there. Um, Dos Santos is a really good fighter. I mean, he does not get a lot of hype, but his only loss in the UFC was his debut, and that was a split decision that could have gone his way. He's on a 5-fight winning streak, six. Six. This was his sixth in a row. He's finished his last two in pretty spectacular fashion, actually. I mean, he knocked out Sean Strickland with a wheel kick. I liked the Muhammad fight. That seemed an appropriate step up in competition. He called out Robbie Lawler, and if you're crazy enough to call out Robbie Lawler, I mean, Lawler's rumored to be fighting Stephen Thompson, but move that guy up in competition at this point. He's earned it. He's more than earned it. He's clearly better than the guys he's been fighting. Let's get him, not in the top 15, but kind of towards it. I mean, him and Cowboy, either Cowboy, be that Cerrone or Oliveira, would be kind of bonkers. And kicking everything off, Livia Renata Souza killed Alex Chambers. Defeated her with a guillotine choke in the first round. Souza's only got one loss in her entire career. It was a split decision against Angela Hill for the Invicta Strawweight title. That fight could have gone her way. I recall scoring it for Hill, but close fight. Souza's... She could become a player very quickly in that division. Again, women's strawweight is the best women's division. That being said, it's still a good one to make a run in. And Souza's a good fighter, man. I mean, Alex Chambers isn't a world beater, and was here again to kind of just serve as the local jobber for the main roster talent type of thing. But when you present him with those fights, Renan Barão was given one of those and couldn't do it. Souza did it quickly. So I look forward to see kind of where she goes in that division. And again, that was UFC Fight Night 137. Long night. God, that was a long night. That was over 6 hours. Incredibly grateful to, Alex Oliveira for a really quick fight. But, because that could have been worse. I mean, again, not the worst fight night in the world. There were some worse ones, but there were some really bad stretches in this. I mean, you take out 4 or 5 of these fights, and you've got a much better card. So, thanks to everyone who read and followed along, be that live or after the fact. My full report is in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania, so I appreciate the support, even though I have yet to, in my estimation, actually deserve it. There is no UFC event this coming week. Yay, I'll have a Saturday to myself. I have no idea what I'll do with it. But in 2 weeks, we have UFC 229, so next week we'll be previewing that. So I gave Jeff the chance to have any thoughts he wanted about this event read in, and he did tell me that he wants Sam Alvey to go away. I can completely sympathize. And empathize. Because, Sam Alvey fights, man. It's not good. Alright. Let me see. News. The couple of big news items that need to be gone over. The major one, there was finally, USADA released their ruling on the Jon Jones situation. They gave him a 15-month suspension, retroactive to the point of the failed test, or was it to his last fight? Probably to the last fight, the time when he knocked out Cormier. This means he will be eligible to return to competition on the 29th of October. This happens to coincide, not coincidentally, mind you, with the UFC's desperate need for a main event for UFC 230, which is November 3rd. Dana White has said that Jon Jones will not be in the main event of that card, which means he probably will, because Dana White's full of shit. But, really, if you get something involving Jon Jones on that card, I mean, I don't know what you do exactly. I'd love to see him and Gustafsson, but you're not going to do him and Cormier. Not likely to do him and Cormier at any rate. But if you get a Jon Jones fight in the main event for UFC 230, probably for the interim light heavyweight title, just because reasons. I mentioned before, 230 is a really good card that's just missing that one really kind of knockout really, really awesome main event. Of course, I'm also of the opinion that they should just promote Dustin Poirier and Nate Diaz to the main event for UFC 230, because give those two maniacs 5 rounds. Please. If we only get 3 rounds of those two, that borders on the criminal. I mean, that's going to be nuts. There's been some consternation about this, some of which makes sense, some of which doesn't. Part of the reason Jon's suspension for a second infraction was only, again, 15 months, stems from his cooperation with USADA investigation, and apparently he's given them some kind of evidence. He's cooperated with them, and this sparked the most hilariously hypocritical reaction from people I have seen in a while. The number of people who are pro-USADA, they want a clean sport. Now, in fairness, I want a clean sport, but again, my position on USADA, some of their pitfalls as well as their benefits, has been documented in the past. But the number of people who are pro-USADA and immediately went, "How dare Jon Jones snitch?" was hilarious. If you are pro-USADA, you should be praising Jon for assisting their investigation and cleaning up the sport. That's what you should be doing if you are pro-USADA. But because we live in a society that has spent 40 years glamorizing and lionizing this bullshit omerta law that was starting with The Godfather and was actually just like a white-collar criminal ethos before that, we hold this as like one of the lowest things you can do to another human being, which is just profoundly stupid. That is just the dumbest thing in the world. If you are pro-USADA, you should be in favor of Jon giving them information that helps them identify other individuals, identify substances, clean up the sport, what have you. You really can't hold these two positions in contradiction to each other. Now, there's another group of people who were claiming that if Jon's saying that he did not knowingly cheat, which was the official finding, then how come he is aware of all of these things? Which is, again, unbelievably fallacious logic. There are plenty of people who have never bought or sold illegal drugs, who have never used illegal drugs, but because of reasons, be it people, be it familial, be it friendships, be it just I live in a bad part of town and I can see the drug dealer on the corner out of my window, have information that would be useful for investigative purposes. If we accept that, as the number was being thrown around, something like 70% of MMA fighters were on PEDs, Jon doesn't train alone. Trains at the time one of the largest camps in the sport. So it is entirely possible that he never knowingly ingested anything. Not saying I believe it necessarily, but it is possible. And still has information. Those two things do not contradict each other at all. I mean, pretending that they do is just, look, if you don't like Jon Jones, fine. He's not a very likable person, quite from everything I know of him outside the cage. He's not a very likable guy. Fine, don't like him. Don't twist the facts and the reality to try to go along with that. Again, now that being said, is it possible he was cheating the whole time and just gave up on someone? Sure. I don't care one way or the other. But let's not pretend that you have to be deeply embedded within these illicit walks of life to have potentially useful information pertaining to them, because you don't. Some, again, there are some maybe there's a few out there that if you know where they're storing, people that are being, if you know the details of a human trafficker's like warehouse, okay, you probably know something. You're probably involved in that, but the notion that that's the only way to have information like that is just, it's intellectually dishonest. It's patently untrue. Just absolutely, absolutely fallacious logic. Again, there's some people who are just pissed that Jon, for his second offense, only got 15 months, and you are complaining that USADA is bowing to the almighty dollar. To which I say, duh. Who do you think pays for all of this? As a serious question to you guys, USADA is not a non-profit organization. The UFC pays them to do this. Now, I'm not of the opinion that they are at the beck and call of the UFC, necessarily. But, yeah, they're employees. Well, not employees, but the UFC is paying them. That's how that relationship works. If that will occasionally cause, theoretical conflict of interest, and yeah, it happens. What do you want to do about it? Because unless all the fans in the world of MMA decide to contribute to independently pay for USADA's testing, and then to impose that on the UFC and then the fighters without their consent, which, it was already imposed on the fighters absent any of their input anyway. But, look, I don't think the UFC, bribed anyone for this, but I'm also not gonna. I also think it would be intellectually dishonest to dismiss the possibility that USADA looked at one of the bigger stars in the sport and found ways to mitigate circumstances that would not be available to other fighters. Now, I don't think that's fair. I don't like that. My only thing about this is I would like, the playing field as far as the application of rules and that stuff and those things to be level. And there are some. Fabricio Verdum got hit with a 2-year suspension for his first infraction. I don't think Verdum challenged anything about it either. Lyoto Machida, that poor guy, got hit with a 2-year suspension because he just admitted that he took something that, should not be banned anyway. That was one of the dumbest things when he was... his suspension was just so profoundly stupid. But, I don't think Verdum challenged anything related to his... And look, we might be in a position where with this system it's better to challenge. Even if you've done it, it's better to... it's not cheap. That's one of the other things about this that people... I don't know if they just don't know or are just willfully ignoring. Arbitration, which is what Jon went to for this, that's not free. USADA's not. I don't think even USADA's paying the arbiter. If anything, it's split between the fighter and USADA. It's probably just the fighter that pays for it. If you want to mount a defense, especially the tainted supplement one, you have to actually pay to have all of your stuff tested, which is not free. Frank Mir, because he had his. It was on, I believe, the MMA Hour. His whole story about dealing with it is pretty incredible, and you should listen to it. You should go online and look it up. It's really worth hearing. But he mentioned at one point that because he was paying to have his stuff tested, he was paying because he was preparing to mount a defense to kind of challenge his failed test, and there was a lack of communication with USADA about which tests he had failed, about what he had failed for, and various windows were closed. And again, this is Frank Mir, so is it possible he was lying through his teeth? I don't think he's lying through his teeth, but again, if you want to be overly paranoid about it, you can. But he mentioned that he had spent, I think it was over $10,000, so over 5 figures he had spent just getting stuff tested and trying to fight his suspension, which is a lot of money. And I guarantee you Jon spent more than that. Because his has been going on longer. This is an expensive process. And there's a lot of fighters who probably legitimately just can't afford to challenge these findings. Which sucks. Again, I prefer that these things be as equitable as possible because these are the rules and the circumstances under which the sport is conducted. Those need to be applied as evenly as possible. But, again, if Jon's got a pile of money to burn, he's willing to spend it on this, then I mean, that's on him. But there's a lot of people who don't, I think, just don't realize the expense, the personal expense that someone like Jon or anyone who challenges these findings puts out, because none of that is free. Absolutely none of it. I mean, again, this is one of those things where they say that USADA will test the supplements you're on to try and detect things that are tainted and shouldn't be there. Sure, they might make that service available, but you're going to pay for it. And is it cheaper to potentially get busted for something? I don't know. I mean, some of that's up to the individual circumstances, might vary, but nothing about this is free. So, Jon is theoretically back. Again, I may not be the biggest fan of Jon outside the cage, but I love watching him fight. He is the best. He's the best fighter of his generation, in my estimation. And it's a shame that he has not been able to get his, life squared away. But I don't think there's anyone better that's, fought in the cage. Also, we got a co-main event for UFC 131, 231. 131. UFC 231 received its co-main event for the vacant women's flyweight title. Number one contender Valentina Shevchenko will fight former strawweight champion Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Good. Best fight they can possibly make for that division. Absolutely the best fight they could make. I'm really looking forward to that fight, actually. Those two have fought several times in Muay Thai competition, amateur and professional, and Joanna's never beaten Valentina. Valentina has beat her 3 times, and there's 1 draw, I want to say, something like that. It's a great fight. I'm leaning towards Valentina because Joanna really is at her best if she's the one understanding and controlling the distance. In fact, if you look at, again, one of the ways Rose had so much success against her was Rose controlled the distance. In addition to Rose's kind of fakes and feints and getting Joanna to bite on them. But distance control is absolutely paramount to Joanna's success. Valentina's going to challenge that. Valentina's also a profoundly gifted counter-striker. And Joanna's usually the aggressor, so yeah, I don't expect this to. I mean, the weird thing about this fight is, it's not a Muay Thai fight, and they're both, their Muay Thai fights were, years ago. They're both better now. All true, but Joanna's game still essentially revolves around her Muay Thai, whereas Valentina has branched hers out a bit. Again, I look forward to the fight. I lean towards Valentina, but again, great fight. 231 does not have a main event yet. That's the co-main as of this recording. But that's a really good fight. That's a really, really good fight. So happy about that. Grab my notes because those were the 2 big things over the week as far as news goes. Got a main event, a co-main event title fight, and we got Jon Jones back. Again, Dana White saying that Jon will not fight at UFC 230, and it's really easy to know when Dana White's lying because his lips are moving. I don't know if I mentioned this last week. This might have been news that broke after that, but MMA legend Norifumi Kid Yamamoto died over the week. This is really sad. He was only 41. He had been fighting cancer for a couple of years, and yeah, just got the better of him. It really sucks. Kid Yamamoto also cannot properly be understood if all you know of him was, oh, he went like 0-3 in the UFC or something, right? This guy was a megastar in Japan. I mean, he drew astronomical ratings for several of his fights. I mean, we're talking, because Japan reports percentage of households. I want to say it was like 20 to 30% of all televisions that were on were watching him fight at various points. I mean, again, just huge, absolutely huge star in Japan. A big part of some of Japanese MMA's revival in a lot of ways. A dynamic fighter. Finishing power, good wrestling. Just got to the UFC too late, which sucks, but happens. Not just too late in terms of his age, because again, he was only 41 when he died. But he also had some knee injuries that really detracted from his overall game. Had a gym that produced some really good guys, including Kyoji Horiguchi, who's an exceptional flyweight and a really darn good bantamweight. I mean, Horiguchi should be in the UFC and should be fighting for the belt. But that's really, really sad. And he's not the type of fighter you can really understand if you haven't done the research into what he meant to the Japanese promotions at various points in time. And if all you know of him is his UFC stuff, then you don't get it. But really, really, really important guy, and really sad that he's gone. In something laughable, Conor McGregor signed an 8-fight deal with the UFC. This means nothing. Look, Conor can do whatever he wants. All right, I mean, first of all, anyone who signs those long-term deals with the UFC, it's meaningless, because the UFC has the prerogative to cut you after any loss. They're not guaranteed fights. Look, and if Conor comes out and smokes Khabib in a few weeks and looks at that contract and says, no, I don't like the terms anymore, guess what we're going to do all over again? It doesn't really mean anything. Chris Cyborg's doing some trash talking to Amanda Nunes ahead of their fight that's coming up. I don't care. Talked about BJ Penn's new fight announcement. I think that's it. I don't think there was anything else there were any other major news items. At least that's all I have on my notes here, so I guess that's it. Alright. We will be back next week to preview UFC 229. It's a big one, guys. Khabib and Conor. Tony Ferguson's back versus Anthony Pettis. I might, in some ways, I'm looking forward to that fight more than the main event. I mean, the main event is going to be crazy. And quite frankly, none of us know what's going to happen. I mean, we can make reasonable predictions in the sense that logically, there's one of two ways this fight goes, but Khabib has never fought someone as accurate as Conor in terms of his striking, and Conor hasn't fought anyone with the wrestling and just kind of mauling that Khabib gives people. In some respects, total unknowns for on each side. But I'm really looking forward to, Tony Ferguson getting back in the cage. Pettis looked good in his last fight, so it'll be interesting. The rest of that card, not quite so much. You have OSP and Dominic Reyes. I don't care. It's light heavyweight. I don't care about anything in light heavyweight. Derek Lewis and Alexander Volkov. It's a slightly above mid-level heavyweight fight. I mean, you can kind of get excited for Volkov's fights, even for heavyweights. Waterson and Herrig's a non-starter. Sean O'Malley kind of sucks. Sergio Pettis is fighting Jussier Formiga. Again, that's a rough fight for both guys. I mean, they're both in the title picture in theory, but because we don't know what's going on, No one knows what's going on. Let's see. Gray Maynard is fighting Nick Lentz. That's gonna suck. Yeah, again, that's a real top-heavy card, but in fairness to it being top-heavy, those top 2 fights are phenomenal fights. So, tune back in next week. Jeff will be back, to the best of my knowledge, so for fans of his, you can look forward to that. You can, let me see, what do I gotta plug then? Last week, Mark Radlich and I reviewed The Predator. Wasn't good. But you can listen to that on Damn You Hollywood. This coming Tuesday, Mark and I will be recording and then immediately releasing a TV party looking at Iron Fist Season 2. Should be an interesting discussion. For the record, Mark and I actually enjoyed Iron Fist Season 1, generally speaking. I mean, I know a lot of people didn't like it. If you want to go into the archives, you can find Mark and I talking about Iron Fist Season 1. And our perspective and where and why it differs from other critical analysis of that particular season. So our take on Season 2 will be up on Tuesday. I'm not quite sure where Mark and I are going to land on this one. I mean, we've talked a little bit about it. There's some things it does much better than Season 1. There's some things it does much worse. So we'll get into the ins and the outs of that on this coming Tuesday, so you can tune in for that. And I will be back next week again hopefully with Jeff to preview 229. Until then, thank you all very much for listening. I deeply appreciate it. Stay safe out there, and please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.